They tried to cleanse me out of the family one detox dinner at a time. But the poison they served became the proof that brought their empire down. The air in East Hampton, even in the dying heat of late summer, was thick with money and a specific cultivated despair. It clung to the glass walls of our house, a $42 million monument to cantilevered arrogance that jutted out over the dune line like a middle finger to the Atlantic. It was Labor Day weekend 2025, and everything smelled of salt bespoke oud incense and the intoxicating brittle scent of old family secrets. I looked out across the vast electric blue rectangle of the infinity pool. It seemed less like water and more like liquefied ambition. I pressed a hand instinctively subtly to my lower stomach. 8 weeks. A secret barely heavier than a grape, but heavy enough to change the entire gravitational pull of my world. A world I had married into only 14 months prior. My name is Riley Harper, and I was a ghost in the machine of the Langford Empire. A former Wall Street quant, I'd specialized in sniffing out algorithmic vulnerabilities. Now I hunted the digital shadows of the hyper-rich, though I hadn't known my true prey until this weekend. The Langfords were not just wealthy. They were Time's foundational asterisk. Senator Preston Langford, my father-in-law, a man whose smile could fund a super PAC, was the immovable object of New York politics. His wife, Victoria, or V, as the society pages insisted, was the immovable force. She had built a $3 billion wellness empire for drips tailored to your astrological sign adaptogens sourced from endangered Himalayan moss private jets stocked exclusively with alkaline water. Tonight was the annual end of summer detox dinner. 28 guests, all polished linen and glittering diamonds, gathered to celebrate the end of reckless indulgence before plunging back into the reckless indulgence of the fall season. I smoothed the silk of my conservative ivory dress. I felt a million miles from the girl who used to survive on instant ramen and coding errors. I was trying desperately to fit into the Langford mold, the perfect, intellectually pliable trophy wife for Grayson, my handsome, perpetually stunted husband. Grayson. He was currently holding court near the imported Italian marble bar, looking exactly like the heir apparent he was tanned, flawlessly tailored and subtly sweating under the weight of his inheritance. He still called his mother Mommy in private, a fact that had initially charmed me with its arrested development. Now it was just another alarming data point. The true center of gravity, however, was Victoria. She glided into the main dining salon, a space entirely encased in floor, to ceiling glass, and the air seemed to drop 5 degrees. She was 58, sculpted by Pilates instructors, who charged more than my mortgage with hair, the color of glacial ice, and eyes that specialized in forensic analysis. "Riley, darling Victoria," said her voice like honey poured over razor wire. She didn't look at me so much as scan me processing inventory. "You look serene." "Thank you, V." I managed offering a polite practiced smile. Serenity was my current defense mechanism. The staff were moving with the tense precision of a military operation. Marisol, the house manager, had been with the family for 22 years. Her face was a map of unspoken contracts, her silence more informative than any confession. The dinner began formally plated courses of obscure sea greens and artisanal air, but the main event, the centerpiece Victoria had orchestrated, hadn't arrived until 8:47 p.m. The service doors swung open, and 2 servers wearing white gloves carried in a single large black slate. On it sat a perfect, vibrant crimson disc, glistening under the crystal chandelier. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victoria announced, raising a flute of what I knew wasn't champagne, but some nitrogen-infused, oxygenated elderflower infusion. "This is the Times Longevity Tartare **. Raw vegan, sourced entirely from an uncultivated Japanese root vegetable prepared by Chef Moreau in Copenhagen. It's taken 6 months of logistics to get this here." She paused, letting the reverence settle. "And I had it made especially for Riley." My stomach lurched, not from nausea, but from instinct. It was a sharp, cold spike of recognition. I'd spent years decrypting malicious code. I understood patterns of decay. Riley Victoria continued her gaze, locking onto mine, a predator admiring its favored bait. You're the newest addition to the dynasty. We must ensure your cellular structure is optimized for the demands of Langford life. She signaled a server who placed a small bespoke serving next to my linen napkin. The tartare was plated with an absurd garnish of gold flakes and what looked like luminous orange zest. Try it, dear. It reverses cellular aging, Victoria purred. As the server stepped away, I leaned slightly over the table, pretending to adjust the crease in my napkin. I inhaled deeply, moving my head into the plume of aroma rising from the dish. The sweetness of the yuzu foam was a flimsy disguise. Beneath it, sharp and metallic, was the unmistakable ghost of bitter almonds, cyanide. A classic untraceable, if handled correctly, poison. My mind went into a zero-latency quant analysis. If I refused, it was an insult, a public declaration of war I wasn't ready for. If I ate it, I died, and my mysterious early-onset pregnancy would be ruled a tragic miscarriage. I looked at Sloane, my sister-in-law, sitting opposite me. Sloane, the golden child, the 6.2 million follower wellness deity who was currently trying to angle her phone discreetly to capture the aesthetic of the tartare for her imminent Instagram story. Sloane, who was currently positioned, just close enough for a switch, in one fluid practiced motion, the kind of subtle movement a top-tier quant makes when executing a high-frequency trade before the market registers the order. I nudged my plate slightly forward, knocking the stem of my water glass, just enough to draw the eye of the waiter hovering nearby. In the half-second of distraction, I swept my arm across the table, exchanging my plate with Sloane's, whose attention was entirely on framing the perfect shot. I caught her eye just as she looked up. Her expression flickered from narcissistic focus to confusion. "Oh, Riley, you bumped my thigh." She began reaching for her plate, now mine. "Sorry, honey," I interrupted smoothly, picking up the fork, and ensuring my movement directed her hand toward the dish. "It's just too beautiful not to share." I watched my heart thrumming a rhythm too fast for my body to keep up as Sloane, obsessed with proving she was the most dedicated acolyte of her mother's gospel, picked up her fork and speared a perfect crescent of the crimson tartare. 9:12 p.m. Sloane was mid-sentence detailing the tartare's micronutrient profile for a pre-recorded Instagram story segment she was filming live on her phone, her face inches from the lens. And the subtle effervescence really speaks to the cellular alignment, you guys. It's like drinking pure. Her voice hitched. Her eyes rolled back, not dramatically, but with a sudden terrifying vacancy. A thin line of white foam, faintly sweet-smelling, began to bubble at the corners of her mouth. Her phone clattered onto the white tablecloth, the screen displaying a frozen image of her own panicked face. She collapsed sideways, knocking over her chair, with a sound that echoed in the suddenly silent dining room. Chaos erupted. Linen napkins, flew crystal stemware shattered. Sloane Victoria shrieked, her voice cracking in a way I'd never heard. For a breathtaking 0.8 seconds, the ice-blonde facade melted, revealing something raw, terrified, and undeniably guilty. Grayson rushed to his sister, babbling incoherently. Preston the senator looked panicked, his political antennae immediately recognizing a catastrophic PR event. I, Riley Harper, played the role of the distressed practical in-law. I knelt, checked Sloane's pulse, and barked instructions over the rising din. "Someone call 911. Grayson, clear her airway. Do not let anyone touch that food." My hands, however, were busy elsewhere. My clutch bag, designed to look like an antique tortoiseshell evening bag, was state-of-the-art. I pressed a small stud on the inside lining. My Apple Vision Pro, disguised as a pair of expensive sunglasses, tucked away, subtly activated its recording function, capturing the entire panicked primal scene. The high-definition optics zoomed past the hysterics, focusing precisely on the slightly disturbed plate and the undeniable foaming. The night dissolved into the flashing blues and reds of EMTs, the sterile smell of paramedics overriding the expensive oud. Sloane was stabilized, intubated, and rushed via private ambulance toward Cornell's specialized toxicology unit. I stood on the manicured lawn, shivering slightly despite the lingering heat. Grayson was a wreck clinging to my arm. Victoria, restored to her glacial composure, was already on a call, her voice coolly negotiating damage control with a board member of her IV company. It must have been a shellfish allergy, I heard her tell him, smoothing her silk jacket. Sloane is notoriously sensitive. I met her eyes across the lawn. She knew I knew. And for the first time I saw not just malice in her gaze, but a deep, bone-deep, possessive fear of losing control. The house was an echo chamber of disaster by 3:00 a.m. The guests had been discreetly ushered out, mostly citing sudden migraines. Grayson was on his way to the hospital, texting me useless reassurances. I poured myself a glass of water, filtered, boiled, and poured from a bottle I had personally unscrewed, and headed not for the master bedroom, but for the hidden office. Victoria Langford ran her empire not on quarterly reports, but on organized, centralized control. Her organizational tool wasn't a filing cabinet, it was Notion. She called it her Family Operating System, or Family OS. It was color-coded, cross-referenced, and terrifyingly comprehensive. Victoria was meticulous. She documented everything, believing that documentation was leverage. And leverage was survival. My old life as a quant hadn't just taught me how to analyze markets. It had taught me how to breach digital fortresses. I knew the digital signature of the Langfords VPN, the default settings on their high-end smart home network, and crucially the predictable patterns of Victoria's digital security protocols, always tied to milestones never random. Numbers. The password to the Family OS wasn't a word. It was a date sequence. The date Sloane was accepted into Harvard. I sat in the glow of my laptop, the glass walls reflecting the deep indigo of the pre-dawn sky. The OS opened with a soft chime. The structure was terrifyingly elegant. Asterisk, asterisk, red zone, financial liabilities and compromise. Asterisk, asterisk, Senator Preston's file was the first thing I clicked. $12 million parked in Cayman shell corporations, registered under names like Apothecary Holdings and Wellness Futures. Clean, plausible names for a political donor network, but the account movements screamed money laundering. He was walking on a federal tightrope, and tonight's drama would only draw more attention. Asterisk, asterisk, Blue Zone proprietary secrets and brand integrity. Asterisk, asterisk. Here lay the skeletons necessary to keep Sloane's influencer empire pristine. The file was sealed, marked Legal divided by Confidential Do Not Open. I accessed it easily. It was the sealed record of Sloane's abortion at 19, a catastrophic event for the image of purity Victoria marketed. Paid for, documented, and buried deep, all in the name of protecting the brand. Asterisk, asterisk. Green Zone personnel and operational security. Asterisk, asterisk. This section was dedicated to Marisol, the house manager, and the staff payroll. It contained everything needed for perfect loyalty. NDA summaries, offshore bonus structures, and the detailed threat assessment profiles for everyone who crossed the threshold. I didn't just skim. I downloaded, encrypted, and mirrored everything onto a triple, redundant drive hidden in my pearl necklace clasp. I was building an Arkstone, by agonizing stone, at 1:1:00 a.m. Saturday, I checked Sloane's status. Stable, critical. In a medically induced coma at Cornell, a phantom poisoning victim. I drove the electric SUV down the winding lanes toward the town, past the other sprawling estates that looked suddenly fragile. My destination was the Langford family's private wine cellar dug deep beneath the original 1,922 carriage house, a place Victoria rarely visited unless hosting a sommelier demonstration. The cellar was cool, dry, and silent. Thousands of bottles, all cataloged by vintage and region. Marisol was down here polishing the silver serving trays with a mechanical focus that suggested she was trying to scour the memory of the previous night from the metal. "Marisol," I said quietly. She didn't jump, but her hand paused mid-wipe. She looked up, her dark eyes flat. Miss Harper, the senator needs his 98 Bordeaux for his stress. The senator can drink tap water tonight. I need to talk about the detox shots. Her polishing cloth stilled entirely. For years I continued walking slowly between the racks, my voice low and steady, devoid of accusation you've been spiking. The wellness shots we get, the bespoke adaptogen-heavy Detox Blends V, insists on serving guests during gatherings, the ones that make people feel lighter before they get sick later on. Marisol swallowed a visible motion in her throat. I follow instructions, Miss Harper. I know, but Victoria's instructions have changed. Last night she tried to kill her own daughter with a Copenhagen tartare to cover up something else. I need to know who else she targeted with the shots. I leaned against a rack of Burgundy, my posture relaxed, non-threatening. I know you've kept detailed records, Marisol. Not on the OSV doesn't trust staff with that level of access, but you keep your own accounting. Because you know better than anyone that loyalty in this family burns out faster than the jet fuel. I tapped the pearl necklace. I have access to everything that proves the senator is cooking books and that Sloane was silenced before. But this is about survival, Marisol. Victoria isn't just poisoning enemies. She's pruning the family tree to ensure her power remains absolute. I need the ledger showing which wives were targeted. Silence stretched thick and heavy. Marisol looked past me toward the racks of ancient, dusty bottles. She knew the game. Riley the Quant was dangerous. But Riley the pregnant, targeted daughter-in-law was a liability Victoria would eliminate. With a deep sigh that sounded like the house itself settling, Marisol reached down to the floor behind a stack of empty champagne crates. She pulled out a small, battered external hard drive, the cheap black plastic Stark against the polished silver to Mrs. Langford believes the bloodline must be pure for the heir, Marisol whispered, her voice raw with accumulated grievance. She could not tolerate competition. Wives who became too independent, wives who carried the wrong gender child, wives who asked too many questions about the senator's campaign finances. She pressed the flash drive into my palm. It was warm, almost pulsing with illicit data. The fertility sabotage ledger, Marisol supplied, her eyes suddenly wet. Every woman who threatened the dynasty. The dates, the dosages, the miscarriage confirmation reports. It's all there. I kept it because I prayed one day someone would burn this whole place down. I closed my hand around the drive. I didn't thank her. Thanking her would obligate her to me. Instead, I simply nodded, recognizing the shared desire for demolition. Go home, Marisol, I said. And tomorrow night, if I need you to make coffee, you make coffee. Nothing more, nothing less. Saturday, 6:00 p.m. The air pressure in the hospital room was suffocating. Sloane with sedated tubes running in and out of her like technological vines. Grayson was sitting beside her, running a hand over her motionless hair, his face aged by 10 years in 36 hours. I waited until he stepped out to speak to a specialist who looked decidedly non-committal. I pulled a small encrypted tablet from my briefcase. I needed to know if Sloane was salvageable as an ally. I bypassed the hospital's limited Wi-Fi and connected to my secure network. I didn't need to wait for Sloane to wake up to deliver the core message. I activated a small, low-frequency audio broadcast aimed only at the monitors in her room, hoping the slight vibration might penetrate the sedation. I spoke clearly, directly, calmly. Sloane, it's Riley. You were poisoned. Your mother tried to kill you. It was collateral damage in a much bigger game. She poisoned you to protect the dynasty, but the dynasty is already collapsing. I have proof of everything. I need your access codes to finalize this. I paused, letting the message resonate. I then injected a single, highly specific piece of information into the audio stream, a piece only Victoria would know. She'd buried the name of the private clinic, where Sloane had her secret abortion at 19. I waited 5 agonizing minutes monitoring her brain activity readings on the nearby screen. A flicker. A minute spike in neural activity that registered just above baseline noise. When Grayson returned looking pale, I was packing my bag. "How is she?" I asked him, my voice carefully neutral. "The doctor says it's a miracle she's stable. The toxin was fast-acting, high concentration." He rubbed his temples. "I don't understand. Why would someone do this?" I looked at Grayson, his earnest confusion. A painful reminder of the man I thought I had married. "You're asking the wrong question, Gray. You need to ask Times who Times benefits from Sloan being out of commission." I walked to the door, pausing with my hand on the cool metal. "I'm going home to rest. I'll be back tomorrow morning." As I walked away, I heard a faint, raspy sound from the bedside monitor, a sound that wasn't the ventilator. Sloane's first spoken words in 24 hours, barely a whisper, but captured perfectly by the mic I'd left active. "Get me out of this family." It was the perfect crack in the foundation. Sunday evening. The Hamptons' twilight was a palette of bruised purples and fading gold. The Langford estate felt like a besieged fortress. Victoria, ever the master of optics, had decided that the best defense against scandal was a performance of profound spiritual resilience. She called it a healing circle on the private stretch of beach behind the house. 12 carefully selected guests, high net worth individuals, whose own reputations were too complex to be publicly associated with a poisoning attempt, were assembled around a large, roaring bonfire. Everyone was instructed to leave phones locked in their rooms. "We cleanse tonight," Victoria announced, her voice amplified by the crackle of the fire. "We release the toxicity of the outside world and realign our energy with the ocean." I was there wearing an innocuous linen dress, moving silently through the periphery. I was not participating. I was executing. 7:03 p.m. As Victoria began a chant about grounding energy, I reached into my pocket and retrieved the flash drive Marisol gave me, the fertility sabotage ledger. I had spent the afternoon cross-referencing it with the shell company data from the family OS. The pattern was undeniable. When a wife became pregnant with a viable female heir, Victoria would orchestrate a wellness mishap that resulted in a miscarriage, ensuring the only legitimate descendant was Grayson. I wasn't using the senator's financial crimes yet. That was my nuclear option for the FBI. Tonight I was striking at the heart of Victoria's personal brand betrayal. I had already created an anonymous drop, a burner email linked to a proxy server in Bucharest, targeting the most vicious, gossipy gossip outlet on the eastern seaboard, Times page 6 asterisk. The subject line read, asterisk asterisk Langford, Dynasty the 4, Queen's secret abortion racket. Asterisk asterisk. The attachment contained the ledger, digitized and annotated, showing the correlation between the delivery dates of high-profile heirs and the corresponding wellness intervention dates. I hit send. 7:15 p.m. The effect wasn't immediate. It was a digital tsunami building momentum. The guests were still staring into the flames when the first wave hit. A Wall Street banker excused himself abruptly, pulling his perfectly tailored jacket tight. Then another. Their phones, supposedly locked away, had somehow survived the lockdown. Perhaps a guest like me had strategically placed a device in a linen basket near the hallway, broadcasting a temporary Wi-Fi pulse. One by one, guests checked their pockets. The murmurs escalated into shouts of outrage as they read the headlines scrolling across their screens. They weren't mourning Sloan. They were realizing they had been funding a serial abuser. The assembly dissolved into panic. Guests, investors, socialites, political allies scattered back toward the house, desperate to call their lawyers and distance themselves from the bonfire of reputation. Victoria watched them go, her face, a mask of disbelief and rising fury. She pivoted toward me, her eyes blazing like embers. "Riley, you did this." "No, V," I said, stepping back toward the dunes away from the beach. "The truth did this. You just made sure the delivery was prompt." Victoria wasn't one for protracted arguments. She ran toward the garage, her perfectly sculpted body moving with surprising speed. She needed to disappear to be unreachable until the media cycle inevitably shifted. Her escape vehicle was her customized Tesla-Plaid all-electric speed and silent, arrogant power. She jammed the key fob into the slot, pressed the start button, and waited. Nothing. Just a soft, digital chirp of error. She tried again, slamming her palm against the dashboard. "Damn it, Grayson, you idiot mechanic." I strolled up to the driver's side window, which Victoria had rolled down in frustration. I held up an identical-looking key fob, dangling it on my index finger. "Gray didn't touch this, V. But I did. Remember that night you gave me the tour of your custom security system? You showed me the fob's backup RFID chip. It's proprietary. A simple swap. Your actual key is currently in the bottom of the pool filter housing. 7:22 p.m. The showdown on the dunes." Victoria threw open the door, emerging onto the sand, looking less like royalty and more like a cornered predator. She lunged for me, driven by pure, unadulterated rage. I was ready. I stepped back, letting her momentum carry her slightly off balance on the loose sand. "You ruined everything," she hissed, clawing at my dress. "You poisoned your own child." "V." I countered my voice, steady my hand, resting lightly possessively on my own belly. "That's not ruined, that's cancelled." I pulled out my phone, not the Vision Pro, but the simple, familiar device I used for everyday communication. I held it high, illuminating my face in the glow of the screen. "I'm not doing this for myself," I said, looking straight into the lens. "I'm doing this for every wife, every daughter, every woman who ever had their ambition poisoned by a Langford." I accessed Sloane's private unlisted account, the one she used for raw, unedited thoughts before her manager sanitized them. Sloane had trusted me enough to give me the password, during my brief hospital visit, a desperate plea for connection. I hit the live stream button. The signal went out instantly to 6. 2 million followers. The Hamptons estate, the roaring bonfire, and the manic, enraged face of Victoria Langford were broadcast across the globe, framed perfectly by the digital beauty of the Atlantic twilight. "Victoria Langford," I stated clearly. My voice ringing across the empty beach, poisoned her own daughter last night to protect a dynasty built on financial crimes and the systematic destruction of her female relatives. A faint, distant sound began to grow, the rhythmic times, thump, thump, thump times of helicopter blades. The FBI rarely moves this fast, unless the initial leak triggers the simultaneous collapse of other larger investigations. Preston's Cayman accounts, now public knowledge, via my anonymous leak, had given the federal prosecutors the necessary triangulation point. Victoria stared at the sky, then back at me, her empire crumbling in real time on a screen no one was physically holding. "You think you've won," she spat, defeated, but still defiant, her eyes wild. "I own the Hamptons. I own the judges. I own the narrative." The sound of the helicopters was deafening now, drowning out the ocean. 2 black FBI choppers, followed by a smaller, faster, tactical craft, descended rapidly toward the beach. I took a deliberate step back, putting distance between myself and the scene of the collapse. I turned toward the shadow of the house, toward the future. "Not anymore, V," I said softly, adjusting my dress over my lower abdomen. The tide just turned. The tactical team hit the sand, running. Victoria didn't resist further. She looked at the FBI agents, then at me one last time, a look of pure, venomous admiration mixed with hatred. She walked toward the federal agents, her posture still impossibly straight. Her last words, uttered just as the handcuffs clicked shut, were barely audible above the rotors. "You think you've won? I own the Hamptons." I simply shook my head, feeling the gentle, private reassurance of the life growing inside me. "Not anymore. Asterisk. We times own the Hamptons." The wreckage of the Langford dynasty was swiftly processed by the slow grinding machinery of justice and bankruptcy courts. Victoria Langford was indicted on 18 counts, attempted murder, conspiracy, wire fraud, and various federal tax evasion charges stemming from the senator's files. Her empire, built on curated wellness and documented control, dissolved into dust. Sloane, released from critical care and sporting a new fierce resilience, didn't hide. She launched a podcast brutally honest and darkly funny titled Time's Unwellness Asterisk. It hit Hasson on Spotify within 3 weeks, fueled by the public's insatiable hunger for Langford catharsis. Her initial statement was simple. My mother tried to kill me over the aesthetic purity of her multi-billion-dollar lie. I'm unplugging. Grayson. Poor, predictable Grayson. He tried to issue a statement about family strife and miscommunication, but the evidence of his compliance documented in the family OS regarding his knowledge of his father's illicit funding was enough. I didn't want his name, his money, or his pity. I filed for divorce on day 4. He signed the papers not in a lawyer's office, but in a fluorescent-lit diner in Montauk, looking small and utterly lost without his mother's edifice to lean on. As for the $42 million estate, it was seized, of course, but the ensuing legal tangle was a nightmare for the federal government. I waited. I leveraged my remaining private wealth and the anonymous backing of several former associates who found the downfall of Victoria Langford deeply satisfying. At the bankruptcy auction, I submitted the final bid. It was symbolic, $1. The deed transferred the lawyers shaking their heads at the absurdity of it all. The house of glass and steel was mine. I didn't move in. I spent the next few weeks overseeing its transformation, hiring contractors who specialized in quiet removal, not ostentatious addition. We ripped out the infinity pool's filtration system, replacing it with native coastal plantings. The sleek modernist interiors were softened, made functional warm. The scent of oud was replaced by pine cleaner and fresh plaster. The structure that had symbolized dynastic control became a safe haven. It was rechristened the Dune Sanctuary, a domestic violence safe house specifically tailored for heiresses, influencers, and wives escaping wealth structures that turned toxic. We offered legal, financial, and psychological resources, all funded by the foundation I quietly established. 1 month later, I stood on the same dune where I had faced Victoria. It was sunrise, the air clean and sharp with the sting of an approaching autumn. I was 7 months pregnant now. My belly was a firm, visible promise of the future. I looked out at the surging, indifferent Atlantic. The empire was gone, not inherited, but raised. And on the ground where it fell, something real, something sustainable was taking root. Some empires aren't inherited. They're raised. And sometimes you just need a good quant, a secret flash drive, and a little bit of poison to start the demolition.